and then I'll let you know. We're live now.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Brian Smith, Chair of the Toronto Community Housing Company's Board of Governance, Communications and Human Resources Committee. Welcome to the public session of today's committee meeting. In the light of the need for social distancing to limit the spread of COVID-19, we're holding this committee meeting virtually. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that the land that each of us is on as we hold this virtual meeting is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse nations, Inuit, Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. During the public session, there are several reports for information, including the standing report on the City Council's direction requiring board attention, TCHC reference policy report, and the biannual Human Resources Division update. There are also two reports for approval: the appointment of a GCHRC Vice Chair report and board and committee meeting rules and procedures report. Members of the public wanting to depute on the agenda items on today's agenda had the option to do so either by submitting a written deputation or being teleconferenced into today's meeting to orally depute on board members. We have received no requests to make deputations at today's meeting. I will now review the public consent agenda items and the public regular agenda items as they are listed on the agenda. We're looking for consent agenda items, approval of the minutes, confirmation of public minutes of March 31st, 2021, and City Council directions requiring board attention. Are there any, there's also businesses arising from the meeting minutes and action items update, appointments to the, with regard to vice chair, board committee meetings, rules of procedure, reference policy, and biannual human resources request for any other business. And if so, first of all, I'd like to ask, would members of the Governance Communications Resources Committee please indicate any agenda item in which they have a conflict of interest, together with the nature of that conflict? Do I hear any? Hearing none, there are no conflicts of interest were declared for any agenda item. Can I please have a motion to approve the public consent agenda? Is there any items, John? Thank you. Seconder, Paula, is that you're waving? Thank you. All those in favor? The public agenda is approved. Business arising from the public meeting minutes. The item 3 is business arising from the public meeting minutes and action items updated, which is put forward for the committee's information. Are there any questions arising from the action items updated? I can't see anybody.
I do, Mr. Chair. It's Councillor Fletcher here.
Paula?
Just for item 1, which is for information only. And as everyone knows, Dara's been working away at making our agendas better. So for Marcel and new board members, we used to have 3. We had an in-camera, we had a private, and then we had public. So now we're just down to 2. But I note that even in the exit interviews that both of the members said there was a lot there. So I think the idea was to speak to the clerk, but that it would come back to the board to determine how well to give any advice to Dara as far as the agenda is concerned, making it easier for board members. So I'd be really interested to hear from Naram. I'm not sure he's with us any longer, and Marcel, who are brand new about the agendas, because we're kind of used to them now, and how we can do that, Mr. Chair. Are we getting better? I think we're getting better. Is there more to do?
Well, I think one of the things that we're going to be looking at, remind me, Dara, the directions in sort of our the way we handle meetings. What's the title? I refer to it Robert's Rules, but it's not.
So item 5 on the agenda for today's meeting is a discussion with respect to the board's rules of procedure. We had a conversation on Friday of last week? No, Friday of the week before, Friday of last week, with governance staff from the city manager's office with respect to action work that the city is undertaking in terms of potential revisions to the city's shareholder direction. We had a conversation. We spoke at that time in relation to the manner in which we might, as an organization, adopt rules of governance at TCHC, what they might look like, how they might compare to the rules that govern meetings in other city-run agencies and related organizations. So we have the opportunity to engage the committee in respect of those issues when we get to item 5 on today's agenda. But we can report, we had the conversation. I would advise that we didn't hear from city staff with whom we met from the city manager's office at that time, that there were any special concerns with respect to our level of compliance with the open meeting rules. We didn't hear that that was a concern for them. We can follow up with city clerk staff on that point, but the opportunity that we have, I think, at this point in time is to incorporate develop rules of procedure that would make it clearer what we do in terms of conducting our meetings.
Sorry,
I think we're looking
Brian.
to bring it back to our June meeting. Is that correct, Dara?
With the input from the committee at today's meeting about what kind of principles should inform that discussion. Yes.
Paula?
The open meeting rules is really the clerk that deals with that. So I'd like to have that signed off that we're by the city clerk. That's
Absolutely.
who oversees open meetings, not the city manager. Those reports go through the city clerk. So that's one of my goals. The other goal is to have the agenda be as easy as possible for board members and for the public. And I feel like we're never getting quite to that. So I've been very respectful and asked that we change a few things. It's time for our committee oversees this. Dara, in your role here, you're the corporate secretary for the board and the committees. So, Mr. Chair, I don't want to belabor it now, but I want to make sure that we're continually moving in that direction to have the easiest, best agenda possible. And I think that Dara has made fantastic changes, our bring forwards when things are coming that was never there before. We should note the changes that have been made. We're down to 2 types of agendas. We have a list, an action list. There's many things. There's just some other, we should just keep going. And we've got a lot of experienced people on our board, including a former chair of a school board, that'd be you, John Campbell, that may have good ideas about how we can continue to be as effective as possible, because the new format is really getting there. And I do want to always thank you, Dara, for moving it to that place and questioning, not just on the open meeting, have that substantiated. And second, just see what more or if anything we should be doing. That's all.
Up to.
So that will come up in item number 5, Paula, and will be, I'm sure, on future agenda too. So, but with regards to business arising from the, if there are no other questions, can I please have a motion to receive the action items update? Sir John, thank you. Seconded by Uba. All those in favor? Motion carried. There was a request to appoint a GCHRC vice chair, and that's item number 4 on the agenda. We still intend to do that. I guess I thought with new board members coming on our committee and the fact that we were a bit upstaged because I think a couple of our members have taken on roles with other committees. I thought we needed a little more time. I'm certainly open for anybody to step forward, but perhaps if people could think about that, I would defer this item to our next meeting in June. I don't think there's a critical need to appoint at this point, but if I'm correct, John, are you playing a new role on tenant services? You're on mute.
Yes, Brian. Sorry, that's true. I'm chair of the Tenant Services Committee.
And Debbie, you're vice chair of the Tenant Services Committee, so I didn't want to put any more pressure on the two of you. Certainly, you're more than welcome to do this. But
you're too kind, Brian. I'm fine, thank you.
Certainly, Uba and our two new board members on the committee might want to think about playing this role. I mean, I guess really the question is, at this point, you know, if I'm not able to make a meeting, you would chair the meeting, but that I think is what we were looking for. So if you could consider that, and then maybe I'll touch base directly with everyone and see if anybody wants to step forward and put their name forward for this role. But in the meantime, I would suggest we defer this until our next meeting. If there's any...
Do you need a mover for deferral?
Yes, please. Thanks, Debbie.
I'll move.
Seconder?
Marcel.
Okay, Marcel, thank you. And as I said, all those in favor, motion's carried, and certainly we'll take care of this item at our next meeting. Thank you. Item number 5 is board and committee meeting rules of procedure. And Dara, you're going to speak to this.
Yes. So as I mentioned in relation to the earlier matter on the business arising, we had a conversation with city staff recently with respect to the city's plans to address the need for the board to have comprehensive rules procedure in the changes that they are contemplating to the city's shareholder direction. And the advice that we've provided in the report in relation to the history of the Toronto parking authorities development of its rules of procedure, I think should be considered as informative, but not necessarily instructive. And by that, I mean, I think there's benefit from having a look at what the Toronto parking experience has been in terms of its development of its rules of procedure, but this isn't necessarily a one size fits all. The board of the Toronto Community Housing Corporation is a corporate board pursuant to the Ontario Business Corporations Act, in contrast to the Toronto Parking Authority, which is a city agency. And so different rules that comply with the overriding principles that the parking authority considered in determining and developing its rules might inform what approach this board takes to its rules of procedure. We haven't provided you with those principles in the report before you. They're listed at page 31 of the meeting package. And essentially what they speak to is the need to consider the governance roles and duties of the board members, duty of collegiality, right of directors to dissent, protection of the right of directors to report to an accountability officer. Now, again, that's a somewhat significant difference in terms of the TCHC board, because not all of the city's accountability officers have jurisdiction over TCHC's board. The integrity commissioner jurisdiction doesn't extend to this board. The role of directors was a matter that was considered. Process to receive information, the procedures with respect to the approval of material transactions, and the timing by which the meeting materials that are put before the board need to be distributed to board members in advance of meeting. Given what we understand the comprehensive nature of the materials that we put before the board and its committees on a regular basis, I think that's a matter that we understand to be an important matter for the board and its committees to make sure that committee members have the opportunity to carefully consider the material that is going to be before them at any meeting in advance of that meeting taking place, and the need to avoid last minute additions to agendas that result in another tranche of materials having to be taken in before a meeting takes place. So those are the kind of principles that the TPA board, given the history perhaps of the circumstances that led the board to adopt those rules, considered in developing its rules of procedure. They may inform the approach that this board wants to take to that process. We've put that information before you so that committee members have the opportunity really to consider the experience of the TPA, decide if it should inform how we proceed, and provide us with direction on a go-forward basis as to elements that the committee and the board would want to see us address through our minutes. You know, that can consider matters like whether or not the types of matters that we bring to the board are appropriate, how we deal with deputations from members of the public through the committee and board process. That's a challenge that I think we have faced in the past. How we avoid the need to defer matters from meeting 1 to meeting 2 just because we run out of time. And how we effectively, efficiently, and fairly get through the board and committee agendas. So with that, I mean, I think this is an opportunity for us to ask the board, this committee, what would you want to see in your rules? How do we address that going forward?
Questions or comments? Paula?
I think if everybody understood that these rules were came out of a very big issue, that being an investigation into a land deal at the Toronto Parking Authority, where the board members were having trouble getting information, having that timely manner. So this is really structured as what the board should be able to expect from management and how the board should conduct itself. I think they're quite helpful. I'll just remind everybody it was very difficult for us to get the materials that were required on the Reuben Tomlinson investigation. So I'm not sure that actually, I think we had something somewhere, but if I was to add something, Brian, it would be about to receive those types of materials in a timely way, or expect that. Perhaps it's there, but I found that it was very difficult, as did everyone. So to me, that's something that we need to be a little clearer on. The process to seek and receive information sufficiently, I guess that's number F then. That would be number F. Dara, could I
Correct.
put that under number F? That,
Yes. Yep, that's how I read it.
okay, that's fine then, if it's under F. So can we adopt these, or what would include these, or send them back in order to have those there? I know that the report by Tories LLP was one that the Ombudsman asked that we have a look at because it was good governance procedure by boards. And these are some of the rules actually that are arising out of that.
Are there other questions or comments? One of the areas, but I didn't hear anybody. One of the areas that I wanted to look at to see how we might improve is with regards to input, especially from tenants, because I think this was, I think, a bit reflected in our exit interviews with the two directors that left, is how we can get better input and discussion from deputations that we have, because obviously our meetings are quite long, and you know, there's a lot of pressure to get them done within a reasonable length of time. So sometimes I don't think we adequately have the ability to fully discuss some of the input that we get from especially tenants at the board meetings. And I'm interested in exploring ways or any suggestions from other city boards that ways to deal with communication and input from our important stakeholders, our tenants. So that's one area that I would like to explore a little more in terms of how to do that better. Any other comments that anyone would like to add? If not, then we could have a motion to approve the principles enumerated in the report as the basis for rules of procedure for Toronto Community Housing Corporation's Board of Directors. I have a motion.
I'll move.
Thanks, Debbie. A seconder, John. All those in favor? Motion's carried.
Thank you.
We have now it's item number 6, the TCHC reference policy report, which is forward for the committee's information. Ask Barbara Schulman if she'd like to speak to that. Barbara.
Sorry, just connecting.
Okay.
So I think we began to touch on this in the in-camera portion, but basically this report provides an overview of the current practice with respect to providing references for current and former employees of TCHC. And while there isn't a formal policy that governs this process right now, we certainly could look at incorporating some guidelines and suggestions to share with TCHC employees that would just provide some good tips for them to keep in mind when providing such references. And I'm happy to receive any questions that committee members might have about this policy.
Is there any comments or questions with regards to the report? Hearing none, I'm pleased to have a motion to receive the reference policy report. Have a person to move that. Uba, would you move that? And seconded by John. All those in favor? Motion's carried. We're going to keep you online, Barbara. The next item
Sure.
is biannual Human Resources Division update. Item 7, which is put forward for the committee's information. Barbara, if you want to speak to it, I assume that everyone has read it. So if you want to add to it, and then we'll have questions.
Sure. So, so this is the report that responds to a couple of the previous requests for information. And so there was a question about the total number of management exempt staff, their duration and tenure, and turnover rate. And that was one specific question. There was another specific question regarding what a policy would look like to ensure that there are extensive searches to hire a diverse group of senior management. And so what I've done in this report, I've provided information in regards to both of those items, and I've also provided a more general overview of the 2021 priorities for the Human Resources Division and some of the key activities and accomplishments to date achieved in the first quarter. And I am happy to take any questions or comments on this report.
Yes, Debbie.
Thank you for your report, Barbara. I thought we were moving away from language around EDI, especially around issues of diversity. Now that we have confronting anti-Black racism unit within TCHC, I was surprised, and I think I say this at every meeting when this comes up, that we don't have any demographic information, because I can swear 2 or 3 years ago someone gave us some data, and so now I'm wondering where that data came from. And I couldn't find it in my files. I don't want to wordsmith during the meeting, but can we not talk about cultural diversity? Cultural diversity would mean hiring all white folks. You know, somebody's Italian, somebody's Polish, somebody is, right? So I think here we're talking about ethno-racial diversity. We're talking about issues of disability and other equity. I think you use language like equity-seeking groups, which is language that's fine with me. I don't see any timelines. I know it talks about that you're beginning implementation of a plan beginning now, and beginning with a survey to benchmark. Do you have end time dates when you'll be reporting back to this committee?
Yes, thank you, through the chair. So we are in the process of building a very comprehensive strategy and plan, and I'd be happy to provide a more fulsome update to the committee just on that piece. Right now, we are already undertaking activities to build knowledge and awareness in the organization in advance of launching the survey. The plan is to launch the survey in September. And part of the reason that we're taking the time to wait until September to do that is that we want to encourage people's comfort level, that would encourage participation in this survey. And in doing so, we want to be able to have employees understand why we're doing the survey, what's motivation, because very often you get low response rates to these types of surveys because staff are uncertain, skeptical about the reason behind it. So we are starting first with a big education component to build that cultural competency and education in the organization. And the plan will be to launch the survey in the fall. in early September. And that survey information will provide us with the baseline information on the current representation of the workforce at TCHC, so that we can then benchmark the effectiveness of any of the strategies that we are undertaking. It'll also give us insights into where the opportunities are. So broadly in the organization, where there may be underrepresentation of different equity-seeking groups, as well as within particular, if there's issues within particular divisions and areas. That survey, as I said, will take place in early September, but I'm happy to come back to the committee at the same time in the early fall to provide a more fulsome outline of the broader plan and the timelines that go along with it.
I would also like for this committee to see your survey instrument as well, just to ensure that you're disaggregating the data, especially around ethno-racial identity. I had another question that just went right out of my head. In terms of division, one of the divisions that we're very much concerned about is our community safety division. Oh, that's my question. Were you planning to roll out the survey across the whole organization, or are you planning to do division by division?
The whole organization. So we will get the information ultimately broken down by division, but we will be launching it company-wide.
Great. And so if you were to start the process in September, then we would expect information back to this board at our January meeting?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so when you bring back the plan, can we have those kinds of timelines attached as well, so that we know what to expect from meeting to meeting? Just so we're building in an accountability framework to the plan.
Certainly.
Paula?
Thank you. Just one before Paula goes. One of the concerns I have, Barbara, about moving this back to the fall is that a number of hirings are already happening, and so I had made given that we've been raising this issue for the last 3 years, my assumption was that we have already agreed that TCHC, especially in senior levels, must become reflective of the communities that it serves and where it's located. So I would assume then that HR is already paying attention, like we did for those of us who sit on the CEO search, like we did with the CEO search, to ensuring that our processes, or that we're identifying the need for racialized candidates, or the need for women, or the need for whatever demographic that we know is underrepresented. Are you doing that?
So thank you for that question. I can confirm that we are employing strategies right now in our recruitment process to ensure that we do broad outreach and that we are targeting a variety of equity-seeking groups. What we don't know definitively, because we don't have the workforce data, is we can't say definitively that we have underrepresentation, for example, of persons with disability, even though intuitively we may think, we may know that as an example. But I can tell you that we are making every effort in the recruitment process, from looking at the qualifications that we require for a job, to where we go and do the posting and the outreach of candidates, to who is participating on our selection panels, to what our assessment tools look like, to make sure that we don't have systemic barriers inherent in any aspect of those process, and we are doing that right now.
Are you taking a look? So, for example, in senior management, I think just a cursory glance will tell us that senior management is overwhelmingly white. And yes, I understand that we do also have a few Asian folks in senior management as well. Are you identifying that there is an absence of African Canadians? There's an absence of First Nations. Are you paying attention to that now as you're recruiting?
So absolutely, we are, because we know that. We know that there is a lack of racial diversity at the more senior levels, and that informs our strategies for sourcing candidates for those roles.
Thank you.
Paula and then John.
Just wanted to ask, I believe the roster for firms is coming back. Can you confirm that, Barbara? It's coming back in June. Is it
For
just for
executive
law
search
firms?
firms?
I'm sorry, is it search firms or
Yes.
law firms?
Through the chair, my understanding is that there is no roster for executive search firms at Toronto Community Housing. I believe that there has been a practice in the past that TCHC has been allowed to leverage the roster that the City of Toronto has, and they have used that approach. However, I believe that there are changes in the procurement policies that may preclude that going forward, and I'll be looking into that to determine whether or not we need to create our own separate roster for Toronto Community Housing.
Number one, there's a roster that's coming on the 29th of June. What's that, Dara? Is it the legal roster? Can't hear you. You're muted. I get to say that to you. You're never muted. You're always on.
Some people wish I would be muted, I'm sure. The roster that's coming back to the committee in June is firms that we're using as third-party investigators.
Oh, okay, that's that one. And there is no roster, and we did not use the city's roster, just because you knew there's never been the city roster used. There was plucked out of the air the last hiring. We did our own for executive recruitment, but I think it's a good thing, where's my chair, to have a process where we have a roster of search firms that we have approved, and as well that are very high on the quotient of diversity and inclusion, that they understand that, they've got that, they can recruit in that way. And I've just gone through another one because I don't know what I did to have to be on all the CEO recruitments. But probably in the last year since we were doing our CEO recruitment, the notion of firms being deft and able to reach into equity-seeking communities or those who've been overlooked is really critical. So I'd like to raise that here, Mr. Chair, about the roster for executive search firms and what that might look like, what we would need to do. Do we use the cities? We have another one, etc. What have we
So
done?
Barbara, if you could let us know as we move forward whether our procurement process requires us to have our own or whether we can use the city's one. But I'd also like to ensure that we set a level within the organization that requires us to use a search firm to make sure that we achieve the goals of diversity that we're setting for ourselves, so that it's not left just internal, that we
Right.
have a process built in.
Brian, that was a motion already from the board, that for all executive leadership positions, that be recruited through a search firm.
So it just need to make
but
sure.
I don't know if Barbara knows that or not.
Yeah, so you just need to, that's where my question was coming from in terms of how we started the work, given that we've been hiring, and it's been unfortunate that many of the hires have not reflected the diversity of our tenant population or the city.
I guess I just want to make sure we build it into our processes.
So I will ensure that, and I have seen that direction from the board, that and the direction was specifically for any hire at the ELT level, that the services of a search firm would be engaged to ensure broad outreach and diversity recruitment, and will ensure that. And we'll also look into the RFP, the issue of creating a roster, whether it's a separate process that we would undertake for TCHC or whether we would want to leverage and are able to leverage the roster that exists for the city. I can certainly confirm, having been involved in this process at the city as part of my role there, that it was very clear the changes that we are expecting from our executive search firms on a go-forward basis in terms of their ability to demonstrate exactly what they do and what strategies they undertake to ensure sourcing of diverse and racialized candidates in particular.
I'm just going to break in again because our little committee, which was chaired by Brian, Adele was on it and I was on it, and Tim came in and out. So that's not clearly reflected actually in the report about the succession planning. Tim was not there the whole time. It was the three of us who slogged a lot of hours, and Tim assisted in some wordsmithing. But we had a roster that was broader than the city's roster, understanding that we were looking for a CEO. And I would like to not just say we're using the city's roster. We added people that we added on there that I think the city's now using, and they weren't using before that. So I'm interested in us having a robust roster with firms that have a track record or an ability to reach sectors that currently and technically just have not been reached by search firms. They don't know anybody. So this is an important issue. I don't know if we would continue to use the roster that we have already pre-approved, Brian, through our, do you remember our roster? I think we had 8 or more firms on it.
They may or may not. I think we looked at both the city and the provincial one, and we sort of did a combined of the two. But I think as Barbara works forward on this, we will eventually bring our own list, and especially with a focus on ensuring that those firms have the experience that we're looking for in the areas of recruitment.
Well, what I'm saying is that we went through a big procurement, and I'm technically saying those firms that were requested to bid for the CEO should be considered our contemporary roster, because we vetted those. And until there's a new policy, those are firms that should be used for the executive recruitment.
So I'm going to suggest that we take that away and report back at a future meeting about our ability to designate those firms as our roster, and if we can't do that, what options do we have to create a roster?
Well, I'm interested in who you're using now then.
I also think we need to pay attention that we're not only hiring white-led firms, recruitment firms.
Is there a speakers list?
Sorry,
John. I've given Paul a lot of supplementaries, but John, it's your turn.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of newspapers, Barbara, and I don't know if you get the Globe and Mail there, but in today's Globe and Mail, there was a great article, a whole section, 4 ways to cultivate diverse candidate pools. And it says, racialized and particularly Black job seekers have faced relatively consistent amounts of hiring bias for 35 years. Here's what companies can do to change that. And it talks specifically about hiring firms, or the problem with hiring firms that are led by white people, university educated white people, because their natural inclination is to go to people, that they feel comfortable with, right? So anyway, I'd be happy to send this to you, or you can go out to
I have it.
Oh, you have it. Good. All right. So it looks really good.
Thank you.
And Debbie, you would love
Thank
this.
you.
I don't know if you get the Globe delivered, but it's quite a good section. So
thanks for pointing that out, John. I'm going to go look for it now, because that's one of the things we're going to talk about as well. So
it's always good to support the press. That's always my view. So
yeah.
Anyway, actually, Barbara, I did have a question, a follow-up question or a point. Does the city of Toronto measure diversity in hiring? Do they have a measurement means by which they measure how diverse their employee group is?
So there is now. It's relatively new. So the city has conducted a workforce survey for a number of years that reflects just the diversity of the workforce. But more recently, in the last year and a half, there is a new talent acquisition system that enables them to collect the data during the recruitment process, which then ultimately allows them to evaluate and report out on the outcomes of the hiring process and to what extent the diversity is being reflected in new hires.
Okay. All right.
That's relatively new.
Great. Okay. Thank you. That's my question.
Is sorry, I'll recognize him. I just have a follow-up with John's question. Is that technology something that we could see whether it works with the changes that we're making with our upgrade in technology?
So I can confirm that the talent acquisition system used by TCHC also allows us to capture information on applicants. And so we would have that information available to us. So the information we don't have, which I think was asked, was what is the current makeup of the workforce? We don't have that because TCH has not conducted that workforce survey. But we do have information on applicants for jobs. To the extent that those applicants are answering, these questions are always posed on a voluntary basis, but we do have that information.
Okay, thank you. Uba, you have a question.
No, I just echo what everybody said. And to Debbie's point, we have been talking about this for the past 3 years, and I haven't seen personally significant change. So Barbara, thank you so much. Now you're working towards progress. My other question is just a quick question. Are we including this data collection also about the vendors? Who's getting the vendors? Is it diverse?
So I'm sorry that you're talking about the procurement
Procurement
process,
yeah.
and unfortunately, I don't have that information. I'm not sure if someone else can speak to that.
Sheila, you can speak to that.
Sheila, you're muted.
I would say to date that we do not collect that information, but it is something that we could take away and look at how we would collect that information, how we would a survey out to our current vendor pool to voluntarily disclose, I think would be the quickest way to start to collect that information, but I'd need to take that away.
And Brian, if I may, just as a follow-up to Uba, it would be good as well, Sheila, if you came back very similar to what Barbara did with the plan in terms of identifying non-white led vendors as well. I thought that the city has a policy on vendor procurement. I would assume that TCHC would be able to follow that same policy.
Yeah, we'll look at that. I mean, to be fair, it is something that as a company we have not yet looked at. And I'm hearing from committee that we need to, and we will turn our attention there.
I guess in terms of our procurement process, we want to make sure that there is a level playing field for groups to apply, and whether there's anything in our processes that are inadvertently not allowing people to submit proposals, so that we need to look at
like not knowing, right? So looking at our outreach strategies, everything.
I would say that under our CABR strategy, that each department in the company is developing an action plan. So there will be an action plan coming out of procurement as well.
Okay.
To look at, are there barriers in the current system and what to do about them. Let me take away how we would collect data about our vendor pool. What's the most expedient way to do that? We'll also talk to the city, see what they do.
Thank you.
Marcel?
I think Councillor Fletcher was before me.
Go ahead. I've talked a lot. You go ahead, Marcel, please.
I'm
Okay,
trying to give everybody equal time.
Okay, as far as like barriers, I don't think there's really a question of barriers. I think the barriers are there. I just think what types of barriers are there, right? Because even though a person may apply for a job and you're collecting the data of like where they're coming from, what background, whatnot, I think the system within the system
Yeah.
becomes a barrier. And I think that same system would also apply for procurement,
Yeah,
right?
you're
So
right.
it's not, if you get what I'm saying?
I do.
So,
Absolutely, yes. It's not only about counting the data, it's about doing the action and hiring the people.
yeah, because like the steps within that
Correct.
itself is the barrier too, right?
The
That's all.
process is the barrier.
Yeah,
Absolutely, Marcel.
So if I could respond to that, I think we recognize, and that's why it's not simply about collecting data and making commitments about, increasing representation. It's what do we need to do as an organization to understand. So things like in recruitment, we talk about unconscious bias training, making sure that the people that are involved in the process understand what those unconscious biases are that inform the way they view something, the way they make a decision. And so the approach to ultimately increasing our representation, whether it's of employees or even of vendors, requires you looking at every aspect of that process that you do. So, how do you articulate your needs for the job? Where do you go to source the candidates? How do you make an assessment of who is suitable and qualified? Putting that equity lens on it to make sure that we don't have barriers that are unintentional, unconscious. And that is the work of what our strategy will help us do.
To set targets as well, Barbara, because hopefully once you've benchmarked and you see where the gaps are, that going forward, hiring and vendors will be about targets, right? Similar to the federal government's employment equity. So it needs lots of work, don't get me wrong, but certainly it's something to take a look at.
Paula, you had a question?
Yes, I just have one that I'm going to come back to gathering the info. Barbara, you said applicants can provide that information on their applications. And how long has that been possible?
At Toronto Community Housing, I believe that's been part of the application system for a couple of years. I don't know specifically, Councillor Fletcher. I could follow up on that and let you know.
Well, I think that over and over again, this committee, Debbie's nodding, this committee's been asking for demographic information on the CSU, including the new VRP. And I believe there was something there at one time, Debbie, but I don't know if it was updated from the last 50 hiring. And now we're being told that doesn't exist. I think we're getting very cranky. So that is what, if you have that information, don't care however many people, maybe it was only of the 243 or however many are in here, it would have been only 150. But I think that's what we'd like to see. And we've asked for that. Like to see that from regular and then the VRP hirings. Now, from what I've heard today, that wouldn't be too difficult.
Mr. Chair, if I could respond, we have provided information, voluntarily disclosed demographic information on the CSU unit to the Tenant Services Committee.
Yes.
But what Barbara is speaking to is looking across the company.
No, I understand that, but we've asked for the, I understand, Sheila, I've got it.
Yeah, but
We
Sheila,
asked for.
that you had no, yeah. Go ahead, Paula.
What did we ask for, Debbie? Sorry, what were you looking for?
We asked for the new hires. And so given that you reminded us that you had presented the information, we were then surprised to be told you didn't have the information.
So Barbara was speaking to information across the company, right?
But we're not.
because you specifically had asked, and I know repeatedly for information about the CSU unit within the company, we did provide that information. But
And
we
we've
can't re-provide it. We could send it out to this committee if it's of interest.
And will it include the last 50 hires or so?
Yeah.
They'll have a break between the regular CSU
And
and
the
when the VRP. So we're looking for VRP on its own. And then the complement, rest of the complement. I think that's what you're looking for, Debbie. Is that not
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And we're also
And-
looking for the connection, the number of new hires in the violence prevention plan, I'm going to call it, VRP, that have a policing background, that are former cops.
So, Mr. Chair, if I could, why don't I pull that information? I can share it with Councillor Fletcher, with Director Douglas, to see if it answers your questions, just to make sure we get it right, and then we'll distribute it to the committee. Just want to make sure we get what it is you're specifically looking for.
So if you could send a draft to Debbie and Paula, and then if there's more refinements necessary, they can let you know. And then once we've got the information in the right format, it can be distributed to the entire committee.
And some of the, just to clarify, I believe there was a similar request made most recently at the May meeting of the Tenant Services Committee. It's possible that there's an overlap in these two requests, and that
Yes.
if we can clarify these two requests, the intention was to bring the request from the May TSC meeting to the next TSC meeting, but it's possible we can address both through reports back to both committees.
Well, since Paula and Debbie are on both committees, hopefully we can get some convergence
everybody's
of
on
the
both
information
committees,
to
yeah.
make sure it's the same information as for both committees then.
Correct.
So both committees can get the same information. So if Sheila, you will work with Debbie and with Paula, and then it can be whatever, once we get it in the right format, we can circulate it.
So
Well,
I have other questions about this report that aren't related to diversity and
Okay,
Cambridge Stars.
proceed.
Proceed. Page 2 of 6, years of service for management and non-union employees. And I guess a non-union are excluded from the bargaining unit, probably because they're confidential, but they're not managers. So just to be clear, why there's two different categories. But the years of service for management and non-union employees, there are 253 who have been there 5 years or less, and yet there's only 450 or 3, something like that, management and non-union employees. So that's a very large number of new employees, and I would like to know more about that. That is of concern. Are they people that left and have been replaced? Are they new hires? Who are they? And where do they come from?
This is the 253 you're referring to, Paula?
In the last 5 years, correct. That's a large number of people.
Through the chair, so Councillor, what I would have to verify is whether or not of the 253, what portion of those employees would have come. I don't think so, but I don't know this for certain. Are any of those people who were formerly in TCHC in a bargaining unit position and now in a management position 5 years or less? And I don't have that answer immediately, so I'm certainly happy to look into that further.
Yeah, I think the board's going to be very interested in that. That's a very large number compared to
I would agree.
the number of management staff that there are. And the turnover is actually quite high. Again, in OPSU is 100%. This is the CSU. There's nobody outside of
Correct.
the CSU that's in OPSU. So there you go.
Correct.
But when we look at management and non-union, those are very large turnovers. Now, 2020 is less, but
Correct.
2019, well, that was when we had a big change with the reorg and a number of people left. I think those are going to be questions when we get to the board that people are going to want to know. So Barbara, the more you can disaggregate that 253, a few people may have gone from the bargaining unit to management, but certainly not 253. And where did they come from? New hires, or people leaving and they're replacing, those kinds of things. That I know that you're going to be asked that, so I'm flagging that for you, so you have that
Thank
info. And the same with, why is the CSU so high? That's amazing. 22%, almost a quarter turned over in whatever year that was, 18. And again, it's still extremely high. And I think I'd like to understand why it's so high. Maybe I'm not the only one who'd like to understand.
I would point out that a portion of the turnover is retirement. So, and I am able to disentangle what portion of the, for example, 2020 management, 8.3% is the total turnover. And I believe it's probably a few close to half, perhaps, that would represent retirement. So in each of those groups, you have a portion of it that is due to retirement, which would be natural, and then the other portion, which would largely be, resignation and or termination. Very small amount, of course, termination. We know overall in the CSU that there have been retention issues based on market competitiveness. That has probably been the biggest influence as far as I understand, but I'm happy to delve deeper and be able to provide more details to you specifically, Councillor, if you have questions, and to be prepared to answer any questions that the board may have.
Yes, I think market comparativeness, that's a really interesting one to understand that. We hear that all the time, and I'd say we're in a difficult job zone, so I'm interested in that. So I think those are the really ones that jumped out at me, Barbara, and thank you for this chart. It's very helpful. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Barbara, in terms of the chart you have on recruitment, I'm not sure what page, I think it's on page 5, which shows the distribution by department. That would basically reflect the majority of those 250, whatever, 253 in that earlier chart. So is that correct? I mean, it shows 155 in operations.
No,
What page is that?
If I may.
Yes.
Sorry, are we on the right page there? For what you're asking, Brian?
The chart before that.
So it's page 4. Page 4.
Is it page
4?
4? Yeah, recruitment activity. Yes. No.
Yes. So if I may, the 253 was the number of management non-union employees with 5 years or less service. This is a different chart that you're looking at here. This is just to give you an overview of our hiring activity in the first quarter of 2021. So it's entirely separate from that other information. And this reflects both temporary and permanent hiring. So this tells you where our activity has been. Management exempt staff, 80 hires, QP 416, 72, OPSU. OPSU is 0 for the first quarter.
The chart includes everybody.
Correct. Company-wide hiring for the first quarter of 2021.
Yeah, okay.
So just on that one, what has been the diversity index on those hirings? I think that would be, since you have that information.
So yes.
By all of them, by QP 416, management exempt, and then down here under the recruitment activity for Q1. So in the CSU for exist is down there. Development, facilities, I think really that's what's being asked for, and you probably have it right at your fingertips. So you could perhaps update that for us, for the board as well. Because if we find that there hasn't been a strategy applied for the hiring after all the conversations, that I'm sure we won't find that, but I do think it's the board's requirement, role and responsibility to ensure that those policies are being thoughtfully handled around the recruitment. So this is very helpful, Barbara. Thank you.
So I will certainly bring whatever information I have on that forward for the board.
Great, thanks very much, Barbara. Are there any other questions or comments that anyone wants to make with regards to the human resources update? If not,
I'd just like to thank Barbara for a very easy to read, very professional approach that we have been looking for. So just, I do want to compliment you on that. Thank you.
Thank
Agreed.
you.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if I could have a motion to receive the biannual Human Resources Division update. Debbie, seconded by Uba. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Is there any other business that the committee member wants to raise at this point? John, yes?
Yeah, I guess I probably should save this for the Tenant Services Committee, but it's in the news lately. Of course, we've been overwhelmed by COVID, but and sort of lost is the discussion of the opioid crisis. And I'm just wondering, Sheila, if we have a sense as to how the opioid crisis has affected residents of Toronto community housing.
So we do. Our CSU unit tracks interventions that they've been involved in assisting tenants who might have overdosed. I don't want to misquote a number, but I believe it was in the order of 20 interventions in 2020 where CSU officers stepped up and provided assistance to tenants who had overdosed, but they do carry the kit. They are trained in administering. There is a harm reduction policy that the board approved. Now we're doing the hard work of developing the procedure to implement that policy. It has to be done with care, but it is a significant issue for our population, for sure.
Okay, I thank you for the answer. It is off topic. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing that. But it just that we were discussing HR, and I was going to ask the question about sort of health and safety from an HR standpoint, and then realizing that of course HR doesn't have anything to do with our tenants. But I thought I would raise it anyhow.
Okay.
I'm glad you did.
I'm going to jump on
important area, and
John
I'm
Cameron.
sure
Now I've opened the door for Paula Fletcher.
You did, my darling. Thank you so much. This just has to do with, and I'm just flagging it, the vaccination rates in TCHC, and we should have perhaps looked at that at our tenant services. So I see you there, Mr. Chair. I've asked our East Toronto Health Partners to please put a clinic on at Blake Boltby. They told me that everybody there could go to Jimmy Simpson. I think if people understand TCHC communities, they understand that folks don't really travel. They are in their community. They might not go that far afield. So I'm just flagging, I'm going to bring this up at the board. I might just send a letter, but I'm interested to make sure that our communities are getting vaccines, that vaccine hesitancy is something we're thinking how to overcome that. For the Blake Bolte, we have everybody. We have Eastview, we have our TCHC, we have the TNO, which is our group that's being paid for by the city, for ambassadors, my office, for doing everything. But I am concerned that there's vaccine hesitancy and that people aren't leaving their communities to get vaccinated. So I know it's not this committee, but I'm just flagging that.
Okay, well,
Mr. Chair.
I'm
Thank
sure Sheila's done some reporting of that, and we'll also look forward to getting some of that information at the board meeting.
you. Yeah,
Can definitely provide an update on where we're at with clinics across the company, vaccines offered to tenants, in what form, what the uptake has been. It's a really significant body of work that a lot of staff are engaged in today.
and what the rates are once we're doing standalone clinics, because it was very hard to get a standalone clinic at a
Yeah.
TCHC site outside of Thorncliffe, which has a big mobilization. I'm not sure what that looks like in Scarborough or other large sites. This is 460 units. It's a major site. So I will be very interested to make sure that those communities that don't tend to travel are being vaccinated and that we're really focused on hesitancy issues.
Well, Sheila can report back at the board meeting on that. Uba, you had a question.
It's not a question, it's a comment. Just to go back to what John was saying. I heard that similar concern and issues, and it's a great to just report that our staff and Sheila, thank you. I heard so many of our buildings have a sign where just to say if anyone have an issue with this, problem, where to go, like go to Shoppers Drug Marts, get a kid, get that support. So I'm glad we're doing that. I just want to mention that. Thank you.
Thanks, Uba. Any further comments or questions? Hearing none, can I have a motion to terminate the public meeting? Thanks, Debbie. Seconded by Marcel. Thank you.
Marcel
All
wants to
those
get
in
out of here.
favor? All those in favor? Great. Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much, everyone, for
you,
your
Brian.
Bye.
your
Well,
work and your,
Thank you.
Good meeting.
thank you.
Mr. Chair, as always, take care. Bye.
Thanks, Paula. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.